The trajectory of enterprise software is undergoing a massive structural transition. For 6 decades, ERP systems were strictly deterministic engines of record. They tracked physical inventory and ledger balances through rigid, human-entered schemas. That era is over. The convergence of legacy transactional databases with advanced generative AI platforms introduces a fundamentally new architecture. We call this the cognitive overlay. It doesn't discard your foundational data. Instead, it deploys a probabilistic execution layer that abstracts legacy complexity. This alters the economics of software licensing at the root level. We're moving from a transactional paradigm directly into an autonomous, cognitive framework.
Consider the financial architecture of your current software deployments. Are you paying a double integration tax on legacy systems while your competitors transition to autonomous agents? Many enterprises are funding the exorbitant maintenance of obsolete enterprise resource planning integration practices. They pay for highly fragile custom API development while simultaneously suffocating under routine operational costs. This is a massive capital drain. When a singular cognitive overlay can unify your data fabric and run complex administrative workflows without manual human entry, your legacy per-seat licensing model becomes an indefensible liability. You are essentially financing the past while your market rivals purchase the future.
In this briefing, we'll cover 4 critical areas. First, the high-stakes hook and executive overview. Second, a detailed operational postmortem. Third, the human blueprint. And finally, a chronological action plan and guardrails. This is an operational breakdown of real-world technical debt versus vendor marketing hype.
Section 1. The high-stakes hook and executive overview, focusing on the collapse of the seat-based model. The core value of enterprise software is no longer just storing data. It is orchestrating it autonomously.
To understand the severity of this transition, we must look at the technological lineage. In the 1960s, we relied on massive mainframes. They ran material requirements planning, functioning essentially as computerized to-do lists for factories. The 1990s brought monolithic, on-premises client servers, attempting to create a single source of truth across the enterprise. The 2000s and 2010s gave us elastic scaling with cloud SaaS integrations. Now we enter the era of cognitive AI overlays. We are shifting rapidly from databases of record to autonomous systems of intelligence. The interface is no longer a graphical menu, it is natural language execution. This timeline represents a total inversion of how human capital interacts with digital infrastructure.
Constellation Research perfectly encapsulates the risk parameters of this shift. They state that replacing an ERP system is like performing brain surgery on a rocket ship. Core financial ledgers and supply chain mechanisms are deeply embedded within your operational systems. Ripping and replacing them invites catastrophic operational failure. But the intelligent abstraction overlay strategy mitigates this risk entirely. You leave your defensible systems of record untouched in the background. You place a cognitive layer on top to orchestrate workflows autonomously. This abstracts the complexity without threatening the foundational integrity of the rocket ship itself.
The structural contrast between these two paradigms is exhaustive. Legacy deterministic systems rely on rigid graphical interfaces, manual data entry, and a financial model built firmly on user seat licensing. Every new employee requires a new paid license. Probabilistic overlays flip this model entirely. They orchestrate multi-step workflows across disjointed platforms, forcing a transition toward outcome-based pricing. Think about your procurement strategy moving forward. If an autonomous agent executes the workflow of 100 employees, your mathematical justification for paying for 100 software seats evaporates. You are no longer paying for access, you are paying for execution.
Section 2. Detailed operational postmortem. The anatomy of the cognitive overlay. A fundamental rule of process automation governs this phase. Automating broken workflows merely scales operational inefficiencies. Technology does not solve broken process logic.
The foundational technology enabling this transition is the Model Context Protocol, or MCP. It is an open standard architecture defining how AI agents securely access data, inspect databases, and call transactional functions. Instead of funding fragile point-to-point custom APIs, MCP acts as a standardized, highly secure barrier for your data. It operates on a strict client-server model. It establishes a controlled interface ensuring models can only fetch and execute authorized data. This mechanism entirely prevents unmanaged access to sensitive corporate records, resolving decades of integration fragility.
Think about how this architecture functions in practice for your executive workflows. Platforms like Microsoft Dynamics 365 or Infor expose secure execution layers through 3 distinct categories: Data tools handle your standard updates, strictly gated by user role schemas. Form tools act as invisible assistants, utilizing server-side view models to respect dynamic context filters without ever touching a client browser. Finally, action tools invoke actual application code. This is exactly why you must demand rigid validation rules and approval gates. The model demands strict operational safeguards because it only sees and acts upon what the authenticated human user is explicitly authorized to access. To fully leverage these protocols, your enterprise architecture must become headless. Headless architecture decouples core business logic from native graphical interfaces, allowing dynamic code execution. Platforms like ServiceNow or Celonis rely on this philosophy to achieve extreme operational flexibility. It allows organizations to dynamically swap back-end models session by session, based on latency, cost, or specific performance constraints. This modularity effectively nullifies restrictive vendor lock-in. You retain control over the logic, while the interface adapts to the cognitive layer.
Section 3. The Human Blueprint: Risk Management and C-Suite Restructuring. A core principle here is that cognitive systems do not replace executive governance. They require it, and they inherit it.
With autonomous agents deployed, your entire risk matrix changes. We must address change fatigue, user resistance, and the protection of your employees' identity capital, because when algorithms begin executing financial transfers, executive liability fundamentally shifts. Your chief financial officer must now actively govern the parameters of automated ledger adjustments and month-end closes to prevent systemic errors. Consequently, your chief information security officer faces a vastly expanded attack surface, defending against prompt injection and sophisticated API vulnerabilities. Your chief data officer secures data privacy, preventing sensitive credential exposure. Your chief compliance officer ensures these automated actions meet complex regional and sector regulations. The General Counsel is tasked with mitigating intellectual property risks stemming from unreviewed probabilistic outputs, and internal audit leaders must develop entirely new, highly contextual, risk-based audit methods designed specifically for agentic workflows. Security perimeters must remain absolute. AI agents must inherit existing role-based access controls to operate safely inside enterprise networks. If a purchasing manager instructs an agent to pull a vendor history report, the architecture restricts the view strictly to what that specific manager is authorized to access. If the agent attempts a transaction outside those explicitly defined privileges, it is rejected by the system. Models must be tightly and predictably constrained. Without inherited access controls, you risk catastrophic, unauthorized privilege escalation across your entire proprietary database.
ServiceNow CEO Bill McDermott defines this dynamic clearly. He states, AI doesn't replace enterprise orchestration. It depends on it. It depends on governance. Workflow orchestration is fundamentally deterministic. It demands absolute adherence to rules for global enterprises. AI, conversely, is probabilistic. It reasons, synthesizes, and adapts, but that probabilistic logic must be strictly supervised by human-in-the-loop protocols. It must remain firmly bound by deterministic guardrails. You cannot deploy probability without a foundation of absolute certainty.
Section 4. The Chronological Action Plan and Guardrails. Strategy and Execution Limits. Before pursuing workflow optimization, you must strictly secure Phase A stability.
The enterprise shopping landscape is currently splitting into two distinct factions. Consider the incumbent evolution. Massive providers like SAP and Workday are building heavily fortified castles. They embed AI reasoning layers deep into their platforms to defend their highly complex legacy ecosystems. Conversely, we see emerging disruptors. Companies like Zoho and Intuit operate with extreme agility, leveraging integrated, AI-native platforms to compress legacy margins. They offer unified general ledgers at a fraction of the traditional cost. If these disruptors successfully prove they can abstract away legacy systems, the incumbents will be forced into a defensive posture, drastically compressing their historical profit margins.
To survive this transition, your execution roadmap must be precise. First, you must secure Phase A stability. Secure your baseline core integrity. Complete your data migration. Ensure clean financial ledgers. And validate your inventory before attempting any advanced optimizations. Once stable, emphasize headless modularization to guarantee long-term system flexibility. Second, adopt the Model Context Protocol to strictly prevent vendor lock-in. Third, implement strict role-based access control inheritance to guarantee agent security. Finally, transition your procurement strategy toward output-based software licensing models. You secure the foundation first, then you deploy the cognitive overlay.
This leads us to a final, necessary calculation for your enterprise leadership. When a single autonomous agent replaces the workflows of 100 licensed users, what is your software vendor actually selling you? The value of legacy software licenses is depreciating rapidly. The platforms that simply store your data will be heavily commoditized. The platforms that intelligently execute your operational work will command your budget. Assess your technical debt carefully, evaluate your upcoming renewals, and prepare your operational architectures for the agentic transition.